Hey Beaks, today we're going to start our discussion into immunity and the immune system. And what better place to start than your innate defenses? Okay, so we're going to talk about what immunity really is today, and we're going to get into what protects you all the time, not against a specific germ out there, but what's always here ready to fight our battles and keep us safe. And that's your innate immunity. Let's see here. So pathogens are sickness makers, right? And there's a whole big range of them, and they can affect almost anything out there, okay, including us, of course. So your immune system, my favorite system, it recognizes foreign bodies and responds with the production of immune cells and proteins. All animals have innate immunity, right? And this is a defense that's immediately active upon infection. But because you have a backbone, you also have this thing called adaptive immunity. So innate immunity is present before any exposure to pathogens, and it's effective from the time of birth, right? It involves non-specific responses to pathogens. It consists of external barriers, internal cellular and chemical defenses. So innate immunity has been there since you were here, right? It's pretty neat. And it's a very just non-specific way to deal with all the germs that are hitting you right now as you're sitting there watching this video. So you have to have defense against them. Now, the opposite of this, or the next step, if you have a spinal cord, is this adaptive immunity. And we're going to talk about this as we go through this unit, but not too much today. Adaptive immunity, or acquired immunity, develops after exposure to agents such as microbes, toxins, other foreign substances. And this is when you learn who the bad guys are and specifically fight individual bad guys. Okay, so here you can see some antibodies, right? And here you can see some white blood cells with their specific receptors on them. Okay, so I like this table quite a bit. I don't know if we're there right now, right? But it's a nice little outline of what's going on with your immune system. And you can see, again, you have innate immunity, okay? And that's just protective barriers and non-specific defenses. Whereas if you have a backbone, you also have adaptive immunity, and we'll get into those pretty soon with your humoral and cell-mediated responses. So an innate immunity recognition response relies on traits common to groups of pathogens. Okay, so it's kind of like a blanket attack against a whole bunch of enemies out there. Okay, and it's found in all plants and animals. And if you have that backbone, it's actually sure it's your first response to infections, but it's also the foundation for that acquired immunity, right? So your acquired immunity, which is way more specific and a lot cooler, you'll see. But this acquired immunity has to know that you're fighting a battle. A lot of times that starts with the innate defenses. A lot of times these cells and things like that are fighting this non-specific, intruder, but that's going to trigger adaptive immunity. Hey, get ready. Here we go. We're dealing with a new bad guy for you to learn about, or maybe an old foe, right, that we already know how to fight, and you're going to tell your adaptive immune system, get ready to go again. Here we go. Now, of course, in biology, we can't just talk about humans because we're not all that, right? There's lots of other types of animals out there. So in insects, they have this exoskeleton made of chitin, and that's their first barrier to pathogens. And they have the digestive system is protected by a barrier and lysozyme. Okay, and you know about lysozyme, we talked about it before. It's an enzyme that breaks down bacterial cell walls. And remember when we did the circulatory system, we also talked about in insects, they have hemolymph, right? And hemocytes circulate within that hemolymph, and this carries out phagocytosis, which ingests and digests, okay, foreign substances into their cells, including bacteria. There you can see one of my favorite insects, a cicada wasp killer. So if you're bored, look up how these things work, these cicada wasp killers. It's really cool what they do to cicadas. It's kind of sick, too. They, like, sting it, but don't kill it. Bury it in their holes, lay their eggs on it to eat it alive. It's just really, really cool. So take a look at that if you have time. So what's going on here with these hemocytes? They secrete antimicrobial peptides that disrupt plasma membranes of fungi and bacteria as well. So they release some little chemicals out there that are also going to destroy the bad guys. Again, non-specifically. Okay, and I like this study here because the graph is pretty easy to understand, but take a look at these graphs and see if you can make sense out of them, right? So the immune system recognizes bacteria and fungi by structures on their cell walls, and an immune response varies with the class of pathogen encountered. So what this study is showing is that, okay, we have the wild type, okay, and obviously the wild type just means, all right, these types of fruit flies you're going to see out there in nature. They're normal. They're not mutated. They're just healthy and they've, have all the genes that they should have and the right sequences of DNA, so everything's working the way that it should, they are the wild type. As you can see, there's also mutants, and these mutants are missing something. They have mutations in their DNA. As you can see here, it affects their immune system, and a large percentage of them eventually die not too long after infection. But what's cool about this study is that you can see on the top here, this fruit fly population was infected by a fungus, right? And the mutants, of course, die, and the wild type are doing okay. But if you look here, if they're a mutant, but they're also given this one little peptide here, this one chemical defensin, it doesn't really help them all that much, right? Defensin, they still die. The fungus still kills them. However, if they're given drosomycin, look at that. The fruit flies actually do okay. So what does that tell you is there's something in this wild type that makes a chemical just like this to keep them alive when they get infected with fungi, right? And down here you can see now they're infected with a type of bacteria, Micrococcus luteus. We might have played with this in lab. And what's going on is, okay, sure, the wild type is still doing well, but look at this. Now, because it's not a fungus, that drosomycin isn't really doing anything, okay? Because, well, that's different. That was fighting a eukaryotic fungal cell, right? Whereas up here now, defensin, So it turns out that the wild type must have something just like defensin inside of it, okay? And the mutants here are dying because they don't have that chemical. Pretty neat. So, of course, innate immunity of mammals is best understood of all the vertebrates because we study that the most, right? We're mammals and we have a backbone, so of course we're going to spend our time studying this. And innate defenses include barrier defenses, phagocytosis, and antimicrobial peptides. All right, but we also have different things and different defenses because we have a backbone. We have natural killer cells, interferons, and the inflammatory response. So we're going to go through all of these together. Your barrier defenses are really just skin and mucous membranes of the respiratory, urinary, and reproductive tracts. Okay, so yes, you have skin all over your body, and there's lots of things about your skin that are very, very, very important. Okay, and those mucous membranes are super important as well because what it does is it traps and allows for the removal of microbes. And many of your body fluids, including saliva, your mucus, your tears, are hostile to many microbes. Just think about it right now. As you're blinking, you're probably getting little droplets in the air, or maybe some fungus and things like that landing in your eyes. You're okay, right? Because your eyes are toxic to these little pathogens that might be trying to make you sick. Okay, you have all those chemicals and enzymes in there saying, no, you may not enter this body right now, and it shreds them. So it's really neat. These barrier defenses are super important. And like I said, your skin, so important. It's obviously a barrier defense because it's kind of like a wall against getting to your insides, but it's not impenetrable, right? But the low pH of your skin is super important. Okay, and of the digestive system, it prevents the growth of many bacteria. It's just not a very hospitable place to live. And there you can see a little Magic the Gathering card, one of the coolest games ever invented. Oh, love Magic. You also have cellular innate defenses. Okay, so pathogens entering the mammalian body are subject to phagocytosis. Okay, now how do you trigger this phagocytosis? Well, phagocytic cells recognize groups of pathogens by their toll-like receptors, or TLRs. So you have these receptor proteins out there just waiting to get told or get triggered into saying, oh, it's time to ingest this foreign body or this foreign cell floating around, and obviously they'll digest it and keep us safe. So a white blood cell engulfs a microbe, then fuses with a lysosome to destroy the microbe, right? Remember what lysosomes are? Those are your cleanup crew inside your body, super, super important for digesting bigger molecules. And in this case, oh boy, yeah, they're very important because they're going to, once you take in the foreign body, let's say it's a pathogen like a bacterial cell or something like that, it'll fuse with the bacterium and start to destroy it, right, which is very important. You can see there's a whole lot of different types of phagocytic cells, neutrophils, macrophages, dendritic cells, and eosinophils. We'll mainly concentrate on macrophages and dendritic cells this unit, but very cool stuff that you can look into there. So besides this cellular defenses with their toll-like receptors and phagocytosis, you also have natural killer cells as vertebrate. Okay, and these circulate throughout your body and detect abnormal cells. They release chemicals leading to cell death, and they inhibit the spread of virally infected or cancerous cells. Okay, so pretty neat that you actually have cells in your body made to kill other cells in your body that are your cells, right? But these natural killer cells are super important, because what if one of your cells really did go rogue? What if it did mutate its DNA and now had cancer and it just was not obeying the rules? Natural killer cells will say, sorry, but you're not obeying the law right now, you gotta go, which is pretty neat. Or if a cell gets so messed up because it's loaded with viruses, right, and the DNA got taken over and it starts to make new viruses and things, natural killer cells might look at that and say, you're not acting correctly, you're not helpful to this organism right now, so you gotta go. Pretty neat. Many cellular innate defenses involve also the lymphatic system, which obviously we talked about with the circulatory system. So the lymphatic system, of course, returns some of that fluid that we lose at our capillary beds, but it also plays a huge role in immunity. Let's take a look at the lymphatic system. So here you can see some of the major parts of the lymphatic system, and of them, of course, your thymus and spleen, but you also have lymph nodes. And as you can see here, there's masses of defensive cells inside of these lymph nodes. And there's a lot of warring that happens in here. And there's also some learning about who actually is a good guy and who's a bad guy that happens in these lymph nodes. So we'll talk more about them in the future. So that's a bit about barrier and cellular defenses. What about antimicrobial peptides and proteins? Well, these peptides and proteins function in innate defense by attacking pathogens or impeding their reproduction. And interferons are pretty cool, okay, because they're going to provide innate defense, interfering, hence the word, with viruses and helping activate macrophages, right? Come on over and eat this. So let's take a look here.
When a cell is infected by a virus, the virus enters the cell and produces structures that are not found in uninfected cells. The presence of this viral material signals the cell to produce interferon. The interferon moves out of the cell and attaches to receptors on nearby cells of the same type. The cell that produces the interferon is unable to save itself. The virus replicates in this cell and then moves out to infect nearby cells. The nearby cell that already has interferon bound to its surface responds in several ways, including production of enzymes that degrade messenger RNA and prevent protein synthesis. Thus, a virus can attach and enter the cell, but completion of the viral replication cycle is prevented.
So as you can see, interferons really do mess up the virus. And how neat is it that your cells are willing to give their own lives to save the other cells? And that's because your cells aren't individual units, right? You are a multicellular organism, and all your cells are out for one thing, for you, right? So they're trying to keep the whole organism safe. Pretty neat. The immune system is just amazing, isn't it? Now, when you guys go on to college, you'll learn a lot more. If you take immunology, you'll learn a lot more about the complement system, okay? And you don't have to really understand the complement system for this course, but you have to understand that it exists, okay? But I still wanted to show you a little bit about it. It's just amazing. It's all about cell signaling. A lot of your immune system is literally just conversations that happen. The cell-to-cell communication is really, really important. And in this case, the non-specific defense that we're going to see here is called the complement system. And it's just a way of these interactions happening. One step leads to another to provide defense for us. Let's see.
Complement consists of a group of serum proteins that activates inflammation, destroys cells, and participates in opsonization. Complement can be activated by a number of different foreign molecules. The complement proteins respond in a sequential manner, producing a cascade of reactions. The major components are C1 through C9, named in the order that they were discovered, not in the order in which they function. The complement cascade can be activated by the classical pathway or by the alternative pathway. In the classical pathway, C1 becomes activated when it binds to an antigen-antibody complex. The activated C1 then cleaves C2 into C2A and C2B, and C4 into C4A and C4B. C2B and C4B combine to form a protease called C3 convertase. C3 convertase then cleaves C3 into C3A and C3B. In the alternative pathway, antigens such as endotoxin, polysaccharides, or cell wall components react with C3b. Small amounts of C3A and C3b are constantly being formed from C3, but without activation they are soon destroyed. C3b reacts with the proteins factor B, factor D, and properdin to form a complex called C3 convertase, which cleaves C3 into C3A and C3b. Both of these pathways of complement activation follow the same sequence after cleavage of C3. C3A is involved in stimulating inflammation. C3b reacts with other complement components to form C3 convertase, which forms more C3A and C3b. C3b also attaches to the surfaces of microorganisms. Phagocytes have a binding site for C3b. Therefore, microorganisms with C3b bound to their surfaces are more susceptible to phagocytosis. Coating of bacteria to make them more susceptible to phagocytosis is called opsonization. Addition of properdin to C3 convertase results in formation of C5 convertase, which cleaves C5 into C5A and C5b. C5A enhances inflammation and acts as a chemoattractant for phagocytes. C5b reacts with other complement components including C6, C7, C8, and C9 to form a membrane attack complex. This structure forms a hole in the cell membrane and causes cells to lyse.
So as you can see, there is a whole lot of complexity to this complement system. And that didn't even cover everything. That just covered the basics of how the complement system works. But just wanted to show you that this immune system, again, is pretty marvelous in the way that it interacts. And again, this took billions of years of evolution, right, for this all to get going correctly. So pretty cool. So one of the things triggered by the complement system is the inflammatory response, which of course we've all dealt with. This response, such as pain and swelling, is brought about by molecules released upon injury or infection. Okay, so you have mast cells, all right, a type of connective tissue, and they release histamine, which triggers blood vessels to dilate and become more permeable, right? And a lot of you have dealt with histamine, right, because you're dealing with your allergies and things like that. So these mast cells degranulate and release these histamine molecules out there, and it causes all kinds of trouble. But activated macrophages, okay, and neutrophils release cytokines, signaling molecules that enhance the immune response. Okay, so what's going to happen is these histamines and these other cytokines, these are signaling molecules, and it's telling cells, hey, let's get ready here. There's something going on. Okay, either you're injured or you're hurt, or there's a new guy in town, a new type of pathogen is showing up. Get ready to fight. And again, this is non-specific. It's just a way to fight whatever bad guys are there, as you can see when you get a splinter. Okay. So here's the inflammatory response. And again, this is a little bit more complex than what you have to know it, but it's better to see the whole picture at once.
The inflammatory response is an important nonspecific defense against tissue damage. It begins when injured tissue cells release chemical signals that activate the endothelial cells of nearby capillaries. Within the capillaries, adhesion molecules called selectins are displayed on the activated endothelial cells. These adhesion molecules attract neutrophils, slow them down, and cause the neutrophils to roll along the endothelium. As the neutrophils roll along the endothelium, they encounter chemicals that activate integrins, which are adhesion receptors on their surfaces. These integrins then tightly attach to adhesion receptor molecules on the endothelial cells. This causes the neutrophils to stick to the endothelium and stop rolling. This accumulation of neutrophils along the walls of the capillary is referred to as margination. The inflammatory mediators released by the injured tissue bring about changes in the environment that cause mast cells to degranulate and release histamine. Histamine causes vasodilation and an opening of the junctions between the endothelial cells, allowing fluid and leukocytes to leave the capillary and enter the infected tissue. The neutrophils now undergo dramatic changes in shape and squeeze through the endothelial wall into the interstitial tissue fluid. This process is called extravasation. The neutrophils, followed by other types of phagocytes, are attracted to the damaged site by chemotactic substances released by bacteria and tissue breakdown products. They ingest and destroy invading bacteria.
All right. So pretty cool. I bet you never knew all of that happened just when you get a little splinter, right? Pretty neat. Again, your immune system is awesome. And again, non-specifically, it takes care of you even when you just get a little splinter or something like that. Okay. Moving along. Okay, so I'm not going to waste your time in this video about pus too much, but if you're in class, maybe we watch some videos together. And I know kids are all into different things anymore with pus and Dr. Pimple Popper and all this nasty stuff. But anyway, pus is a sign that your immune system is working, right? So think about it. You just saw that video where the white blood cells are starting to eat, you know, the bacteria and like the little cellular components that broke through with the injury and things like that. Well, all of that stuff has to go somewhere, right? Law of conservation of mass. It doesn't just disappear. So pus is the resultant of a little war happening there, right? So pus is a sign that your immune system is actually working. The inflammatory response is on, right? And basically, as long as the pus is above, you know, and it kind of grows on the external surface, right? You might have a layer of skin or so on top of it, but that's okay. You don't want pus to be buried beneath your tissues or on the inside of your body, right? Because that's an abscess, and that can be very dangerous. Okay. Okay, so inflammation can either be local or systemic, right? Which means it travels throughout your body. So if you ever, you know, got a splinter or sprained your ankle or something like that, sure, that's a local inflammation or a local inflammatory response. Whereas if you've had a fever, well, okay, right, that's systemic then, right? So fever is systemic response triggered by pyrogens released by macrophages and sometimes toxins from pathogens. And you could also have experienced, hopefully not, but septic shock is a life-threatening condition caused by an overwhelming inflammatory response. So sometimes it just kind of takes over whatever's making you sick or giving you problems, and your entire body starts to fight, and that's called septic shock, and that can be very dangerous. And actually right now, as I'm recording this video, we're going through the COVID pandemic, right, the coronavirus, and what's a new thing is they're seeing how a lot of times little kids are getting this thing. It's similar to Kawasaki's disease, where it's just they're reaching this full, you know, inflammation, and they get rashes and fevers and things like that, and it's actually affecting their hearts and stuff. So it's very rare, but yeah, septic shock or this systemic inflammation can be very, very dangerous. And finally, we have to talk about evolution, of course, because evolution is the backbone of biology. And the problem is, what we talked about today are these pathogens and how we fight them non-specifically. So you are set up. You have all these defenses ready to roll in case you have these little germs get inside of you or on you. And that's okay, because our immune system says, nah, get out of here. We're going to get you before you can even take home, right? Take hold of our body and make a home in there, make us sick. You have these innate defenses, right? These non-specific barriers, cellular defenses, inflammatory response. You have all this stuff set up so that they can't make us sick. Well, sometimes pathogens now are changing. Sometimes they have changed themselves to elude our innate defenses. And then, thank goodness, we have our acquired immunity, right? We have our other specific defenses on the inside waiting. So it's like, oh boy, we have our castle walls built up. But if somebody finds a way to get through those walls or get over those walls, that's okay, because we have a whole reserve of specialized troops sitting there and waiting. Really, really cool. So here's an example with tuberculosis. So pretty sad. This kills more than 1 million people every single year, and a ton of people are carrying tuberculosis.
An estimated 1/3 of the world's population is infected with tuberculosis. 1/3. And here's the culprit: the minuscule bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. But does that mean 2.3 billion people are sick? Fortunately not. Only a small proportion of them actually become sick. To understand why, let's take a closer look at the bacterium itself. When someone with TB coughs, they expel little drops of saliva that fly into the air. Some of them may contain the TB mycobacteria. which can then be inhaled by someone close by. The mycobacteria then continue their journey down the respiratory tract and into the lungs. That person is then infected with TB. And this is where it all becomes a little more complicated. The body detects the invasion and sends out its first line of defense. This includes special cells called macrophages, which engulf the mycobacteria and transport them to the lymph nodes, where they are neutralized. If they're neutralized, the person will have what is called latent tuberculosis. This means they're infected with the bacterium, but they don't have active TB disease, and they're not sick. However, in 5% of cases, the immune system is overwhelmed. The TB mycobacteria multiply and escape, and the person falls ill. This often happens with young children, whose immune systems are not fully developed. In other cases, latent TB can wake up and become active TB. This can happen months later, or even years later, especially in adults with weak immune systems. For example, people who are HIV positive, or who've had organ transplants, or who are undergoing chemotherapy. Once in the lungs, the bacteria may spread via the bloodstream or the lymphatic system to other parts of the body, to the lymph nodes, bones and joints, the digestive system, the central nervous system, the liver, or the heart. So what happens when someone has active TB? Let's imagine the infections in the lungs, as this is the most commonplace. The patient starts coughing, has difficulty breathing, and suffers from chest pains. If these symptoms last for more than a few weeks, and are accompanied by fever, night sweats, and weight loss, the doctor has good reason to suspect tuberculosis. The next stage is diagnosis, and then treatment. The battle is far from over.
Well, was that the most depressing video you've ever seen in your life? Right? Boy, oh boy, that doctor and patient looks so sad. But tuberculosis is no laughing matter. It's a sad thing. So, wow. What we've covered today is all of those defenses that you have going. And as you can see, some things are going to get through them. And that's going to bring us to acquired immunity or adaptive immunity. So we'll talk about that next time. So hopefully this video was helpful as we start our journey into the immune system. And I'll talk to you again soon. Take care.